Hey everyone, welcome. Today my guest is Chris Franz. Is it Franz or Franz? I always forget to ask people before how to pronounce their names.
Franz is fine, but
Franz.
I've had it said every which way.
I found Chris through LinkedIn and I've been, searching for people who have useful things to say, specifically to CFOs and aspiring CFOs. And so luckily LinkedIn has been feeding me people and ideas that support what I'm looking for. And so that's how I found you, Chris. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, why you are putting this thought leadership out to the world.
Thanks, April. I am a product of 20 plus years of corporate finance, and while I have had I think, an interesting and productive travel upward towards the CFO role, it has been a combination of great luck and mentorship and hard work. I've got a decent track record of driving revenue growth and financial efficiency. I've been lucky enough to be involved with securing and raising capital, supporting business expansions. I've gained the expertise in financial planning and risk management. I've certainly become better in communication, both internally and externally to a company. Internally focused on the talent, the employees, becoming more of a people focused CFO as opposed to just a numbers focused CFO, and trying to tie all of that back to the company from the finance lens, because obviously that's the role of the CFO first and foremost. But I think that the great CFOs are going to be a combination of both numbers and people and situations, and be great evangelists and great supporters internally and externally of the company.
Yeah,
Um,
that's that's a tall order. And we'll go there because that's exactly the article that you wrote that caught my attention, right? You wrote about the CFO and like what's happening in the CFO market and the fact that there are a lot more vacancies would lead one to believe that there's a lot of movement, but there's not. And so will you explain that a little bit? Like what's happening with the seat of the CFO right now, according to Chris?
so it is, and I said in the article, I said reality, and reality is far messier than we realize, right? There's this there's this last few years transfer of, I think, talent to what we would have originally called consulting, but now we call it fractional, right? And so there's this fractional component and there's the seated component. And oftentimes the two are different in thought, in effort, in intention. But the fact that these two things exist at times are slamming into each other, which creates a little bit of an enigma around what's actually happening at the CFO level. There's a lack of new accounting entrants from undergrad and graduate, which creates a strain in the talent pools. But then you add this component, this sort of interesting component where there's openings, but companies are looking for what has been told to me is, purple squirrel, diamonds in the rough, whatever term you want to use. And unfortunately, there's a lot of CFOs that are of high caliber, high quality. They just may not tick every single box, and so then they're not considered. The pool is still broad enough, is still thick enough to find the right people to fit into these roles. But then you add in the time frame where a lot of companies take somewhere between 3 weeks and 8 weeks, 12 weeks. I mean, I've seen hiring processes that are 4 months long. There's a lot of CFOs that don't necessarily want to attach themselves to a 4 month process or a 2 month process for that matter. So all of this becomes this sort of swirl where there's nothing that there's very little that is easy flowing. You get a lot of complexity. You get a lot of right place, wrong time, wrong place, right time, right? You're not having nice, easy intersections, which then creates a lot of friction and chaos. There's this the balance that I talked about teetering between fractional CFO and full-time CFO is also made a little bit enigmatic around size of companies. So if you're a fractional CFO, does that mean that you can run $100 million company, or what's the floor? What's the ceiling? What does the thresholds look like? Now put yourself in the seat of the CEO or the seat of the board who is looking for a CFO. They're dealing with a pool of all of these intersections as well, and that makes it, I think, even more difficult.
Those boxes, like that purple squirrel, right? Everyone's looking to check. What are some of the boxes that they're now trying to check that they weren't trying to check before?
I think some of the new boxes are um, strategy, transformation, technology, workforce dynamics, um, regulatory hurdles, and then you have the underlying component of private equity, right? Where now it's not just a role where you're sort of internal to your reporting dynamics and your operating dynamics, because now you have effectively, you're a portco, so you have a parent company that you're working for and under. And some are going to be more open to a portco running natively to how they may have always run, and then there's going to be others where it's a much more stringent constraint set of how they want the company to operate. And then all of the other ideas, transformation, technology, strategy, workforce dynamics. Remember, we have what is it, 6 or 7 generations now in the workforce. So at any given time, you can be across all of those generations. You have to be plugged into all of those dynamics to make sure that it's not only working underneath you, but your message, the message of the C-suite as a whole, needs to resonate not only with the youngest, but with the oldest as well.
When it comes to finding those purple squirrels or checking all those boxes, is it a lack of clarity on the part of the people who are doing the hiring, or is it an unwillingness to train those things? Or is it that CFOs have them and they don't know how to communicate them? Like, what do you see as, or are all these things interplaying into this mismatch?
I think there's a middle layer where there's sort of the day-to-day that there's just squishing in all of the day-to-day operations, and we'll just call that people are busy, right? It's an
Sure. Yeah.
easy layer, right?
Yeah.
The beginning and the end are really where I would focus, because and it's not really begin and end, but let's just say left side, right side of this, and maybe the right side looks like, to your point, it looks like where a lot of CFOs or potential CFOs candidates don't know how to necessarily communicate all of these layers, right? They don't know how to necessarily market themselves. But remember, endemically, it's a 30-70, 20-80, where you've got extrovert to introvert, right? And so that's going to be a different personality layer, where traditionally the CFO is going to be much more focused on sort of results and operational and tactical. And now in 2025 and beyond, you want it to be a broad thinker, a strategist, understand the finances internally and the economics externally, right? And understand the layering of competitors and the marketplace. And then if we add back that sort of private equity component, where there's always going to be a push for M&A, right? So you're always going to be on the edge of the envelope, trying to find the next thing that you can acquire for inorganic growth while you're still focused on organic growth. Well, all of those things are complex, in and of themselves. The left side of this equation then is what I call the overabundance or data ubiquity in the marketplace, right? The idea that everyone can get in the pool from a candidacy standpoint creates an overwhelming effect for people like yourself. That ubiquity is hurting us, right? It's creating layers of complexity and confusion that are very difficult to unwind. To find the right person for a client becomes very difficult when you're not just wading through hundreds, but you're now wading through thousands. We're tripping over the overabundance of data on one side. We are expanding the role to be finance and strategy and people and places and things. And you put those two things on the outside of the equation, and then you add the day-to-day complexity that just comes with business. And that's why this has become more difficult, more confusing.
That makes a lot of sense. As you're talking, a few things are coming up for me. One, I heard a lot that would help an aspiring CFO as far as like skill sets, right? So I heard if you're in the seat and you can carve out the space to develop your next skill set, develop that people side of your personality, develop that M&A side of your skill set. We've talked about some of the gaps. How do we now solution the problem?
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's a great question.
Yeah.
I think that succession planning it needs to be thought of actively. It can't be something that's just sort of brought up and then sort of looked at on a monthly or quarterly basis, but it has to be something that is being considered on a real time, on a regular occurrence basis, as much as you would think about the business or cash flow or anything like that, right? So just think profit. But succession planning, meaning not only who's going to take the CFO role next, but who's going to take the next role of all of the roles underneath the C of the CFO. But we can do that for the COO or the CMO, the CSO. It doesn't matter, right? There's always going to be there's usually, I won't say always, but there's usually going to be a trail underneath those executive layers. Who's going to take the next role of all of the roles underneath? And so if we're constantly working on that succession planning, that's going to be one of the solves for how we get better at this, number one. Number two, the mentorship, the education, and the pure intentionality for anyone that is willing and able to continue to move up in their career. Oftentimes they just need opportunities. Well, those opportunities sometimes don't happen if you don't have leadership that is intentional about pulling people up. When I think about communication, as much as you can, more face to face than virtual, right? So people can see authentic reaction. They can get visual clues from what people are saying and how they're saying it, and as opposed to having to make assumptions around how people feel virtually or through writing or through texting, right? Which I think still, it still breeds the importance of face to face as being something that I think is important for business success. I'm not opposed to remote. I'm not opposed to hybrid. I'm not opposed to full, in office. But it's all role specific. It's all time and place.
That point about succession planning is huge because I think that when we think about it, it's like, okay, we know the CFO is going to retire in 6 months, and that's when the succession planning starts. When you have that forethought, and the CFO and the office of the CHRO or the chief people officer are creating this partnership, then it can become this massive boon, not only to the office of the CFO, but to the whole company, because you're giving, like you said, you're creating a program whereby you're not just grooming the next CFO, but then you're planning for everything around that CFO. And then you don't have to like panic hire a recruiter because, your assistant controller just got burned out and left. That succession planning really can solve a whole lot of problems because you're bringing in this aspect of training, you're bringing in the aspect of mentorship. You are now in control of filling in those gaps around all the things that the next CFO needs, to your point, bringing in that strategy. It's like that's a brilliant solution, and one that I don't think would take a ton of time, but would reap huge benefits.
It's intention and determination. I use sports and business as a direct corollary between the two and the idea of success. Even if you're doing it recreationally, you still want to perform, you still want to do well. The same thing exists in business, right? And if you have a determination and an intention to for things like succession and things like mentoring and things like education and growth, it's going to help you. It's going to help the human side, the human capital side of the company. It's always going to turn into a boon, to your point, financially as well, right? Because your cost per is always going to be less than if you've got this wild turnover, or if you've got the controller that left with no, with no warning, right? Things like that become very expensive very quickly. The other thing to consider when we talk about the solutions is smarter matching, right? Smarter matching is going to mean the stack of requirements and the stack of expectations, regardless of whether you're hiring a CFO or you're hiring an AP accountant. You want to have that core set of things that the company needs as the basic building blocks. It has to be something that everyone agrees can be achievable and attainable. If you're asking the CFO to do 47 things, it's going to be very difficult for one person to do those things. So you want to be balancing those things. Well, that doesn't come by chance. That comes with a lot of thought. It comes with a lot of focus. But probably most important, it comes with a lot of communication, a lot of collaboration, not only with your peers internally, but it can also be benefited by collaboration externally with peers in your network.
This has been good. I always like to end on those solutions, so I appreciate your input and appreciate your willingness to come and share your thoughts with us. All right. Thank you, Chris.
All right, thanks, April.